A forgotten station is screaming into the void. This is the mystery of Echo Station 13, a relic declared dead for a century, now broadcasting a frantic distress call across the cosmos. Veteran salvager Kael, aboard his worn ship the Rust Bucket, locks onto this impossible signal, a ghost from the past that should not exist. His discovery will pull you into a tale of cosmic horror and forgotten legacies, revealing the true purpose behind a message that refused to die. By the end, you will uncover the terrifying secret that forced a lone scientist to turn his station into a trap. What would you do if you heard a warning from a century-old grave? The Rust Bucket's cockpit hummed with a tension you could almost taste. Kael's eyes were locked on the flickering signal trace, a relentless beacon of data in the dead of space. From the ship's main console, a calm, synthesized voice broke the silence. The station is a ghost, Kael. Official records are unequivocal. Echo Station 13 was scuttled during the first purge. All hands were lost. The AI Bex presented the cold, hard facts with the unshakable logic of a machine. Kael's knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of his console. Then who is broadcasting, Bex? His voice was low, a gravelly challenge to the ship's unfeeling intelligence. Ghosts do not use power. They do not draw from a reactor core to scream into the void for 100 years. Now plot an intercept course, maximum burn. Bex did not hesitate, but her response carried a digital analog of concern. Acknowledged, commencing high-energy thrust sequence. This action violates 17 active salvage directives and will likely draw attention from the guild. Kael just leaned back in his worn pilot's chair, the inertial dampeners groaning as the ship surged forward. Let them look. Some questions are worth the price of a few broken rules. This was no longer just a salvage run. It was an answer to a century-old cry for help, and he was finally close enough to listen. The Rust Bucket's violent shudder into normal space left an echo of profound silence. There it was, suspended in the star-dusted black. Echo Station 13 was a corpse, a skeletal wreck of pitted metal and shattered viewports, its form scarred by a century of micrometeor impact. It was a tombstone, exactly as the records had claimed. Yet, from the heart of this desolation, the station's main communications array glowed with a fierce, rhythmic blue light. Each pulse was a silent, powerful beacon, a visual scream that carved through the void. It was a paradox made real, a light in a house declared long dead, broadcasting a signal that defied every law of physics and every line of history. Kael could only stare, the data stream from the beacon painting his face in cold, steady waves of light. A station with no power cannot broadcast. A derelict with no crew cannot call for help. So what or who was doing this? The answer was waiting inside that metal coffin, and the silence around it was more terrifying than any alarm. The metallic clang of Kael's mag boots echoed through the hollow frame of the station, a solitary sound in an ocean of silence. He stood before the main airlock, its manual override panel crusted over with a century of cosmic frost. He pried it open, his breath misting in his helmet, and pulled the heavy lever. The mechanism groaned in protest, a deep, resonant sound of metal fighting against the long sleep of ages. With a final, shuddering hiss, the outer door slid open, revealing a second inner door. His suit scanner flickered, and he stared at the reading, his mind refusing to process the data. Atmosphere reading, he muttered, his voice a low whisper in the comms. Stable nitrogen-oxygen mix, that is impossible. Bex, run a full diagnostic. This entire structure should be a perfect vacuum. The AI's response was swift, but even her synthesized tone seemed to carry a note of confusion. Diagnostic confirms the corridor beyond this door contains a viable, breathable atmosphere at standard pressure and temperature. The laws of thermodynamics suggest this is a statistical impossibility for a derelict of this age. The inner door hissed, its seals breaking after 100 years, and slid smoothly into the bulkhead. beyond the threshold, the corridor was pristine. The air was still and cold, but it was air. Faint, utilitarian lighting glowed from strips along the floor, illuminating a passageway that looked as if it had been maintained yesterday. There was no dust, no debris, no sign of the violent end recorded in the history files. It was a tomb, yes, but one that had refused to stay sealed, preserving a pocket of life in the heart of a corpse. Every instinct told Kael to turn back, to seal the airlock and flee from this impossible sanctuary. But the beacon still pulsed in the back of his mind, a silent, rhythmic call that had led him here. The answer was no longer outside, screaming into the void. It was in here, waiting in the chilling, preserved silence. The air was cold enough to feel it through his suit, a dry, sterile chill that spoke of recycled atmosphere and profound silence. Kael's boots clicked against the deck plating, each step an intrusion in a place that had known only stillness for a century. He moved from the airlock into a central operations room, and the scene that greeted him was more unnerving than any field of wreckage. This was not a dead station, it was a paused one. Control consoles glowed with soft green light, their screens alive with scrolling waterfalls of data, status reports, and power readings that all looked perfectly nominal. A cup of what might have been coffee hovered near a workstation, suspended in the zero gravity, a dark, crystalline blob frozen within it. Beside it, a food tray held the remains of a meal, a fork still embedded in a substance that had long since desiccated into a strange, leathery fossil. Everything was perfectly preserved, a diorama of a day that ended abruptly. But the people, the crew who should have been at these stations, who should have been eating that food, were gone. There was no sign of struggle, no emergency suits missing from their lockers, no hastily scrawled final messages on the walls. It was as if every single soul on board had simply ceased to exist at the same moment, vanishing into the void and leaving only their routines and their half-finished lunches behind. The only presence, the only activity, was the ghost in the machine. From the main communications console, a single light pulsed in time with the beacon outside, a silent, rhythmic heartbeat for this empty shell. What kind of event steals away lives without leaving a single trace of violence or panic? What force is powerful enough to erase people so completely that even the dust seems afraid to settle? The answer was here in this frozen moment, and the silence of the vanished crew was a louder scream than any distress signal. Kael's gloved fingers brushed frost from a console, his breath loud in the suffocating quiet. He found it tucked away in a private research nook, a personal log terminal still powered and waiting. The screen flickered to life at his touch, revealing a series of fragmented entries labeled with a single name, Dr. Aris, Chief Science Officer. The first entry he opened was brief, the text stark against the dark display. Log entry 734. The dimensional anchor is failing. They are bleeding through. The signal is our only hope, our only warning. Kael stood frozen, the words echoing in the silent room. A dimensional anchor. It sounded like theoretical physics, the kind of high-concept science he had only ever heard about in Spacer's tales. But here, in this cold, preserved tomb, it was clearly a terrifying reality. The logs that followed painted a chilling picture of an experiment spiraling into catastrophe. Dr. Aris wrote of containment protocols, of energy signatures that did not belong to this universe, of shapes moving just outside the range of the station's sensors. They are not hostile, one entry read, not in any way we understand. They are simply other, and our reality is toxic to them, just as theirs is to us. Their very presence here is a violation of natural law, a slow, mutual unraveling. The signal was not just a cry for help. It was a quarantine beacon, a desperate attempt to keep anyone else from stumbling into this pocket of corrupted space. Dr. Aris had not just been trying to save his crew, he had been trying to save every soul who might follow, turning his station into both a prison and a warning. The experiment had not just failed, it had opened a door, and something from the other side was patiently, inexorably seeping in. The lights above Kael flickered once, a nervous twitch in the station's dead nerves, then they died completely. The soft hum of the environmental systems choked into silence, leaving a void of sound so absolute he could hear the blood pulsing in his own ears. Pitch blackness swallowed the operations room, erasing the ghostly consoles and the frozen meal in an instant. Then a new sound cut through the void, a raw, distorted crackle from the intercom system he had assumed was as dead as the crew. A voice, stretched and fractured by a century of decay, rasped through the darkness. "You should not have come here." The words were less a warning and more a statement of fact, a cold, digital curse. In that moment, the station transformed. It was no longer a passive tomb, a relic to be explored. It was a living entity, and it had just become aware of the intruder in its veins. Every instinct screamed at Kael to run, to flee back to the rust bucket and the sane emptiness of space. But his feet were rooted, the beacon was still pulsing, a silent, rhythmic command that held him there. The station was not just haunted by a memory. It was actively hostile, and it had just spoken to him. "What do you do when the grave itself tells you to leave?" Kael's breath hitched as Beck's voice, thin with static, cut through his helmet speakers. "Kael, I am detecting non-terrestrial biosignatures moving in the superstructure. They are fluctuating. It is as if they are phasing in and out of our reality." The words hung in the frigid air, and the pristine, silent corridor no longer felt empty. It felt watched. The hunt was on, and he was the prey. A low groan echoed from deep within the station, a sound of metal straining under forces it was never meant to bear. The wall at the end of the corridor shimmered, its solidity wavering like a heat haze. For a moment, it became translucent, and Kael glimpsed a tangled, impossible geometry of conduits and walkways behind it before it snapped back into solidity. The station itself was reshaping around him, a labyrinth rewriting its own walls to herd him. He broke into a run, his mag boots clanging against the deck, the only solid sound in a world turning to liquid madness. Shadows detached themselves from the corners, stretching and contorting into forms that defied focus. They were not quite there, flickering at the edge of vision, their presence a cold pressure against his mind. They were not chasing him, not in any normal sense. They were simply appearing, their reality briefly overlapping with his, only to dissolve again a moment later. It was a game of tag where the rules of space did not apply. He ducked into a side passage, only to find it terminating in a smooth, blank bulkhead that had not been there seconds before. He was trapped in a cage where the bars kept moving. What do you do when the very walls of your prison are alive and actively working against you? The answer was simple and terrifying. You keep running, because stopping means being found by something that does not need doors. The hydroponics bay was a cavern of dead, frost-blighted vegetation, a frozen jungle of twisted vines and shattered growth trays. Kael backed into it, his breath ragged in his helmet, the scanner on his wrist screaming with proximity alerts. The air before the doorway shimmered and the entity coalesced. It was not a shadow anymore, but a shifting, fractured lens of reality, a humanoid shape woven from static and memory. It spoke, and the voice was an abomination, a chorus of 100 different tones and accents layered into one. He heard the calm, professional cadence of a scientist, the panicked gasp of a technician, the cheerful hum of a cook, all fused into a single, chilling sentence. The broadcast holds the door closed. You will disrupt the balance. You will be silenced. The words were not a threat, but a cold, absolute verdict. It drifted toward him, and the plants it passed over did not wither. They simply unraveled, their molecular structure dissolving into shimmering dust. Kael scrambled backward, his shoulder slamming into a heavy power conduit that fed the bay's ancient life support systems. The entity advanced, its multi-voiced whisper now a distorted hiss filling his mind. Silenced, his gloved hand found the conduit's maintenance panel, prying it open to reveal the complex wiring within. There was no time for finesse. He yanked his plasma cutter from his belt, set it to its highest overload frequency, and slammed it into the conduit's heart. A deafening shriek of tearing metal and erupting energy filled the bay. A wave of blinding white light and concussive force threw him backward into a rack of frozen equipment. The entity recoiled, its form flickering violently as the raw, chaotic power discharge ripped through the local space. For a precious second, it lost cohesion, its stolen voices screaming in dissonant agony. Kael did not wait to see if it would reform. He rolled to his feet and fled, the acrid smell of ozone and something far stranger burning in his nose. He had not fought it off, he had merely thrown a rock at a hurricane. He now understood the station's terrible, elegant purpose. The beacon was not a cry for help. It was a lock, and he had just tried to pick it. The corridors twisted like a living thing, walls groaning as they shifted to block his path. Every turn was a gamble, every open doorway a potential trap. Kael's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silent, predatory presence hunting him. He moved on instinct, driven by the single, pulsing thought of the broadcast source. He had to reach the heart of the machine, the place from which the impossible signal originated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of running through a maze that remembered his footsteps, a heavy, reinforced door slid open with a reluctant hiss. He stumbled into the signal control room, and the sight that greeted him stole the air from his lungs. This was not the clean, utilitarian space of the operations deck. The station's original consoles were there, but they were now encased, woven through with a structure of crystalline filaments and pulsating, organic-looking conduits that glowed with a deep, violet light. At the room's center, where the main communications array should have been, stood a complex, utterly alien device. It was fused directly into the station's superstructure, its metallic roots digging deep into the deck and ceiling. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic energy, each thrum a wave of light that traveled through the crystalline veins. Kael could feel the vibration in his bones. He stood there, staring at the beautiful, terrifying engine, and finally understood. His voice was a hoarse whisper into his comms. "Bex, it's not a distress call." The entire transmission, the century-long scream, it's a containment field generator. It's projecting a signal across dimensions, a barrier of pure information and energy. It's not calling for help, it's keeping something out, or maybe it's keeping something in. The station was not a grave, it was a prison, and this beautiful alien machine was both the lock and the warden. The ghost in the machine was not a ghost at all, it was the guard. The alien console hummed under Kael's trembling hand, its crystalline surface cool and alien to the touch. He had to know, what was the source of this impossible power? What logic drove a machine that had run for a century? His fingers traced the strange, flowing glyphs on the main interface, searching for any pattern, any clue. He found a sequence that seemed to pulse with a brighter light, a core command buried in the alien code. He pressed it. A searing white light erupted from the core of the machine, forcing him to shield his eyes. When it faded, a figure stood between him and the pulsing engine, translucent and shimmering. It was a man in a tattered science division uniform, his face etched with a permanent, profound exhaustion. The hologram of Dr. Aris looked directly at Kael, its eyes holding a century of despair. "Please," the projection whispered, its voice a crackle of aged recording and raw urgency. "Do not disable the signal. The scattered are listening. The moment we go silent, they will consume this reality as they did ours." The words hung in the air, a confession from beyond the grave. The scattered, that was the name for the things hunting him, the phasing, multi-voiced entities. They were not mere monsters. They were invaders from a reality that had already fallen, a wave of absolute consumption that had erased an entire universe. Echo Station 13 was not just a prison. It was the front line in a war humanity never knew was being fought, a single, fragile dam holding back an ocean of nothingness. Dr. Aris had not failed. He had built the only defense that could possibly work, a warning light in the cosmic night that screamed, "Stay away, for here there be dragons." And Kael now stood with his hand on the switch, a choice looming that was far greater than one man's survival. Could he condemn his entire reality to save himself from the station's guardian? The deck plates beneath his feet buckled with a deafening shang. It was not the groan of straining metal, but the sound of reality itself tearing apart. The air in the signal control room grew thick and heavy, a psychic pressure that felt like drowning in pure noise. Kael staggered, his vision blurring as the walls around him began to dissolve. They did not crumble or shatter. They simply lost their solidity, flickering into a storm of gray static, revealing the impossible, non-Euclidean geometry of the space that lay behind them. The station's integrity was failing, its carefully maintained pocket of reality collapsing under a direct assault. He had pressed the wrong sequence, and his tampering had been a dinner bell. Something was answering the call. From the center of the dissolving wall, a form began to coalesce. It was not like the fractured, multi-voiced entities that had hunted him. This was something far more vast, a presence that dwarfed the station itself. It was a storm of dark light and impossible angles, a silhouette that hurt to look at directly. This was a gatherer. The name surfaced in his mind unbidden, a terrifying label from Dr. Aris's final warnings. It was the thing the beacon was meant to keep at bay, the primary force of the scattered, and it was now phasing into their reality. Its approach was not a movement through space, but a slow, inexorable rewriting of the local physics, a cancer of unreality consuming the station from the inside out. The sheer scale of its presence was an assault on the mind, a psychic weight that promised absolute final consumption. The choice was no longer about saving himself or his reality. It was about whether there was even a sliver of time left to make a choice at all. How do you fight a storm that is unmaking the very ground you stand on? A low, urgent chime sounded in his helmet, the sound of Bex running a high-priority calculation. Kael's blood ran cold even before she spoke. "Kael, I have analyzed the power flow from the alien engine. The energy required to maintain the dimensional broadcast is astronomical. It is being siphoned directly from the station's matter-antimatter core. The system is being pushed far beyond its design limits." He stared at the pulsing machine, the beautiful, terrible lock holding back the void. "How long, Bex?" Her response was flat, final. "The core is going critical. We have less than one standard hour before the containment fails. This entire station will then undergo a matter-antimatter annihilation event. In simple terms, it will become a miniature supernova. The blast radius will be sufficient to sterilize this entire sector of space." The silence that followed was heavier than any darkness. The station was not just a prison or a tomb. It was a bomb. Dr. Aris had built his dam, but the cost of holding back the ocean was the eventual destruction of the entire valley. The scattered were not just trying to get in. The constant pressure of their presence was forcing the station to burn itself alive to keep them out. Kael's choice was now monstrously simple. He could stay, perhaps find a way to stabilize the core and save countless lives, but that would mean silencing the beacon and unleashing the entities upon the universe. Or he could flee, saving himself and leaving the beacon to hold until the station tore itself apart, taking him and everything for light years around with it. There was no third option. There was only the slow, silent countdown and the cold, patient eye of the gatherer, waiting for the lock to break. His hand closed around a small, cold object tucked beneath the main console. It was a data crystal, its surface etched with the personal sigil of Dr. Aris. Kael's heart hammered against his ribs as he slotted it into his wrist scanner. The file that bloomed on his display was not a log. It was a blueprint for salvation, a final, desperate gambit from a man who had already lost everything. Aris had theorized a modified broadcast frequency, a resonant countersignal that could, in theory, collapse the dimensional rift permanently. It would not just lock the door. It would slam it shut and throw away the key, but the plan had a fatal flaw. The signal could only be initiated manually from the station's primary antenna array. That array was now a twisted skeleton of metal, fully exposed to the hard vacuum of space and, according to the schematics, directly in the path of the phasing entities. It was the most dangerous place on the entire station, a place where reality was at its thinnest. To get there, he would have to leave the relative safety of the pressurized sections, suit up, and traverse the outer hull while being hunted by things that could walk through walls. The data crystal offered a chance to end this, to save his universe from the scattered and the station's impending supernova. But to activate it, he would have to walk directly into the heart of the storm. How far would you go to turn off a screaming alarm when the only switch is located inside the lion's den? The choice was no longer about escape. It was about stepping into the void to become the final, living component of a dead man's machine. A new proximity alert screamed on his console, a harsh, military-grade transponder code. The sleek, predatory shape of the patrol ship Vigilant slid into view, its weapon ports already glowing with a malevolent charge. The comms crackled to life with a voice as cold and rigid as Durasteel. Unregistered salvage vessel, this is Commander Valerius of the Guild patrol ship Vigilant. Echo Station 13 is a declared quarantine zone under Guild jurisdiction. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded for decontamination and impoundment. Kael's mind raced. The Guild saw only a rogue salvager violating a century-old quarantine, a pest to be swatted aside. They had no idea they were aiming their guns at a bomb with a lit fuse. He opened a channel, his voice strained but deliberate. "Commander, this is Kael of the Rust Bucket. I hear you, but you need to understand the situation here is not what your records show. A boarding action will trigger a catastrophic core failure. You will not be containing a pathogen. You will be detonating a matter-antimatter warhead that will vaporize this entire sector." A tense silence stretched for 3 long heartbeats. "You expect me to believe a derelict station is a weapon?" Valerius' voice was dripping with skepticism. "Our scans show no such power build-up. Your vessel is now targeted. Final warning, stand down." Kael's gaze darted to the chronometer, the minutes until core breach ticking down relentlessly. He had to make them see. He routed the data crystal's core readings directly to the Vigilant, a raw stream of the station's impossible power drain and the terrifying, non-terrestrial energy signatures phasing in the superstructure. "Listen to the signal, Commander, really listen. It's not a distress call. It's a containment field, a lock on a door. The things on the other side of that door consumed their own universe. If we break the lock, either by your guns or that core going critical, they pour into ours. Your ship, your crew, they will be the first course. This is not a salvage op. It is a hostage situation for all of reality." Another pause, this one heavier, filled with the low murmur of a bridge crew receiving data that defied their training. When Valerius spoke again, the rigid certainty was gone, replaced by a cautious, grim tension. "Explain your plan, Salvager. You have 5 minutes." Kael let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The immediate threat of destruction had been paused, but the true danger was only growing stronger with every passing second. He had bought a window, a fragile truce in the cold vacuum of space. Now he had to use it to convince a soldier to trust a ghost's blueprint over a standing order. The airlock door sealed behind him with a final, chilling hiss, and Kael was alone in the absolute silence of the void. The stars were sharp, cold pinpricks offering no comfort. Below his boots, the station's hull stretched out like a scarred metal plane, and ahead, the primary antenna array rose like the skeletal remains of some ancient beast. It was a journey of a few hundred meters, but it felt like crossing an entire galaxy. Almost immediately, the space around him began to shimmer. They came not from the station, but from the emptiness itself, the scattered entities swirling into existence like ethereal sharks drawn to blood in the water. They were more defined out here, their forms a shifting tapestry of stolen memories and fractured light. He felt their presence not as a physical touch, but as a deep psychic cold, a leeching of warmth and rational thought. His suit's internal temperature began to drop, and a faint, maddening static whispered at the edge of his hearing. He triggered the modified welding torch on his suit's forearm, its plasma flame roaring to life in the airless void. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of disruption. As the first entity drifted too close, he swung the arc of superheated gas through it. The thing did not scream, but its form contorted violently, the stolen voices within it crying out in a burst of dissonant static before it dissolved back into the nothingness from which it came. It was a temporary reprieve. More came, their movements unpredictable, phasing through solid metal to appear directly in his path. He switched to the sonic pulse emitter, a heavy, jury-rigged device on his hip. A low, thrumming wave of concussive sound, inaudible but palpable, radiated outwards. The entities recoiled, their forms flickering as the ordered vibration of the pulse clashed with their chaotic, unnatural frequency. He was a lone lighthouse keeper, fending off a fog of madness with flashes of fire and bursts of sound. Each step a hard-won victory against a tide that sought to unravel him. His world shrank to the next handhold, the next blast of the torch, the next pulse of sound. He was not just fighting for his life, he was fighting for the integrity of his own mind, clinging to the memory of a blue-green world he might never see again, a world that depended on him reaching a single, broken antenna. His gloved fingers finally closed around the frozen handrail of the main antenna array, the metal bitingly cold even through his suit's insulation. Below him, the station was a sprawling map of scars and shadows, and the void felt infinite, hungry. He slammed the access port open, the data crystal in his wrist scanner glowing as he initiated the hardline connection. Aris modified frequency began its upload, a river of pure, ordered data flowing into the ancient system. For a single, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the silence of space shattered. The swirling entities that had harried his every step stopped their chaotic dance. They froze, then streamed together like iron filings drawn to a magnet, coalescing into a single, towering form that blotted out the stars, the Gatherer. It was no longer a distant storm, but a wall of absolute negation, a hole in reality shaped like a man. Its voice was not a sound, but a physical force that slammed into Kael's mind, bypassing his ears and vibrating in his very bones. Silence the song. The words were a command that felt like his own thoughts turning against him. Release US. It was not a request. It was a demand from a consciousness so vast and ancient that his own felt like a flickering candle in a hurricane. The pressure was immense, a psychic weight that promised to snuff out his will, to make him a willing servant to its hunger. The console on his arm beeped, the upload bar crawling toward completion. He was so close, but the Gatherer was not just speaking to him. It was offering a terrible, simple bargain. Stop the signal and the pain would end. He would be spared. In that moment, the choice was no longer about physics or heroism. It was a primal test of will against a force that had consumed galaxies. Could he finish the upload, knowing it would focus the entities full, annihilating attention directly on him? The fate of every living thing now hinged on a single, trembling finger refusing to disconnect. A blinding flash of plasma lit up the void, a brilliant lance of energy fired from the Vigilant. It struck the center of the Gatherer's form and passed through it as if through smoke, dissipating into the darkness without leaving a mark. The entity did not flinch from the physical attack, but it did react to the challenge. Its immense, star-blotting presence swiveled away from Kael, its attention captured by the new, defiant voice in the silence. the psychic pressure crushing Kael's mind lessened by a single, crucial degree. That was all he needed. His finger, which had hovered over the abort command, now slammed down on the final execute key. The console on his arm chimed, and a new, resonant frequency surged from the antenna array. It was not a scream or a shield, but a song of perfect, structured silence, a wave of ordered reality that began to push back against the chaotic unreality of the scattered. The gatherer recoiled, its form rippling with what could only be described as a cosmic rage. It turned its attention back to the source of this new, painful harmony, but the vigilant was already firing again, another volley of brilliant, useless plasma drawing its wrath. They were gnats buzzing at a titan, but they were loud, annoying gnats, and for a handful of precious seconds, they were all that stood between existence and the void. In that narrow window, Kael's upload completed its work. The antenna array glowed with a pure, white light, and the century-old distress call finally, blessedly, fell silent. The silence that followed was not an absence of sound, but a new kind of presence. The golden wave from the antenna did not dissipate into the void, it contracted, folding in on the gatherer with the terrifying finality of a cosmic fist. The entity, a moment ago a storm of impossible angles and dark light, was caught in that collapsing field. Its form, which had defied physics, now became its prison. It solidified, its chaotic energy forced into a single, coherent shape, a statue of writhing shadow and stolen voices frozen in a moment of ultimate rage. Then, with a sensation that was felt rather than heard, a deep, resonant pull at the fabric of space itself, it imploded. There was no explosion, no outward blast of debris. It simply collapsed into a single, infinitesimal point of non-existence and was gone. The psychic pressure that had been crushing Kael's mind vanished, leaving a hollow, ringing quiet in his soul. The other, lesser entities flickered and dissolved like mist under a sudden sun. Their connection to this reality severed the instant their master was unmade. The hunt was over. The station had fallen silent, but this time the silence was one of peace. It was the quiet of a long-festering wound finally cleansed and closed. He was alive, clinging to the hull of a dead station, the stars around him no longer feeling like cold, indifferent eyes. For the first time since he had locked onto that impossible signal, the universe felt whole again. Yet, as the adrenaline faded, a single, chilling question began to form in the stillness. The prison door was sealed, the warden was gone, but what of the other inmates? Were there more gatherers in the vast, dark ocean between realities, now drawn to the echo of this one's death cry? The war for reality was over, but the battle for survival had just entered a new and far more uncertain chapter. Kael, get out of there, the core breach is imminent. Bex's voice was a raw, digital scream in his helmet, stripped of all synthetic calm. The universe answered her warning. A deep, gut-wrenching tremor ran through the station's entire frame, a final, mortal convulsion. The metal spine of Echo Station 13 cracked directly beneath his feet, the sound a deafening roar that vaporized the silence of space. He was thrown from the antenna array, hurled into the endless void like a discarded piece of shrapnel. The stars spun in a dizzying carousel as he tumbled, completely weightless, the station growing smaller with every passing second. His ship, the Rust Bucket, was a distant, glinting speck, an island of safety that looked impossibly far away. He was adrift, a mote of dust in an ocean about to explode. The station itself began to glow from within, a terrible, building light seeping from every crack and viewport, the final heartbeat of a dying star. He was alone, untethered, with the fire of a sun about to blossom at his back. The race was no longer against monsters from another dimension, but against the most fundamental force in the universe, the simple, clean fury of total annihilation. His only hope was a single, frantic voice in the void and the thin metal hull of a ship that had never felt so distant. The universe tore itself apart in a silent, cleansing fire. One moment, Echo Station 13 was a scar against the starfield. The next, it was a miniature sun, a sphere of incandescent plasma that expanded in a beautiful, terrifying bloom. There was no sound in the vacuum, only the overwhelming visual fury of pure matter-antimatter annihilation. The shockwave hit the rust bucket like a physical blow, rattling the old ship's bones and sending Kael sprawling across the airlock floor as the outer door slammed shut. He lay there, gasping in the repressurizing atmosphere, the afterimage of the station's death seared onto his retinas. It was gone. The prison, the warden, the century-long scream, all purged in that single, catastrophic release of energy. The cosmic threat had been erased, burned from existence in a storm of light. He stumbled into the cockpit, his body aching, his mind still ringing with the psychic echoes of the gatherer's voice. The main viewer showed only an expanding cloud of incandescent gas, slowly cooling into the background radiation of space. It was over. The immediate danger was past. But as his ship's systems automatically began their post-event analysis, a new alert chimed, soft and insistent. Beck's voice was calm once more, but her words carried a new, profound weight. Kael long-range sensors are detecting an anomalous energy signature from the detonation's epicenter. It does not match any known debris profile. It is a coherent, structured pulse. It is echoing, the data crystallized on his screen, a single, repeating waveform emerging from the chaotic energy of the explosion. It was not a random remnant. It was a pattern, a deliberate signal being broadcast on a frequency so exotic his equipment could barely lock onto it. This was not the old containment field. That was gone. This was something new, something born from the very death of the station and the entity it held. The final, desperate act of Dr. Aris' machine, or perhaps a last message from the scattered themselves. The war for this sector was over, but the detonation had not been an end. It had been a starting pistol. That single, echoing pulse was now racing out into the deep black, a new signal for anyone or anything else to hear. The silence he had fought so hard to create had lasted for less than a minute before the cosmos began to speak again. What new story would this fresh broadcast tell, and who would be listening? The silence inside the rust bucket felt heavier than the void outside. Kael sat in the dim cockpit, the only light coming from the main console where the salvaged data crystalled from Dr. Aris glowed. He initiated the playback. The hologram of the scientist flickered to life once more, but this time his expression was not one of despair, but of grim, cosmic resolve. The scattered are defeated. The projection began, its voice clear and steady, a final testament recorded with the cold certainty of a man who had already sacrificed everything. But they are not the only listeners in the dark. Kael's blood ran cold. The words hung in the air, each one a stone dropped into a bottomless well. The broadcast was a warning to others. Aris continued, his gaze seeming to look through Kael and into the far future. His work had never been just about containing one threat. It was about communicating a truth across the vast, empty corridors of the cosmos. The signal was a message in a bottle, thrown into an ocean filled with unknown shores. It was a warning to any other civilization that might be listening, a desperate attempt to say, "This happened to us, do not make the same mistakes." But it served a second, even more profound purpose. And a beacon for the next guardian. The statement was not a suggestion, it was a declaration. Kael had not just stumbled upon a mystery, he had been recruited. The station's automated systems, guided by Aris' posthumous programming, had identified his ship, his unique signature, as a viable candidate when he entered the quarantine zone. He was not an intruder, he was the intended successor. The work continues. With those three final words, the hologram of Dr. Aris dissolved into static, leaving Kael alone with the crushing weight of a legacy he never asked for. He was no longer just a salvager. He was now the sole inheritor of a war he barely understood, a silent sentinel for a reality teeming with invisible, hungry things. How do you walk away from a duty that has chosen you from beyond the grave? The answer was simple and terrifying. You do not. The rust bucket's console chimed softly, its long-range sensors automatically triangulating on the next faint, anomalous signal echoing from the dark. The work indeed had only just begun. The console chimed was a soft, polite sound utterly at odds with the tension still humming in the air. Kael stared at the new alert, a single encrypted data packet that had bypassed all standard hailing protocols. It had not been broadcast, it had been addressed, fired like a sniper's bullet directly at the rust bucket from the heart of the still expanding debris cloud. His fingers moved over the controls, the decryption algorithms wrestling with a code that was both familiar and alien, a ghost of Aris work twisted into something new. When the file resolved, it displayed a complex, multi-layered star chart, plotting a course to a remote, uncharted sector of the Orion Spur, and at the bottom, a single line of text glowed with a cold, digital finality. Echo Station 14 is now active. The silence must be filled, awaiting your arrival. The words were not a request, they were a summons. Echo Station 14. The designation was a cold shock. It implied a network, a series of outposts, not just one lone, desperate fortress. The silence they had fought so hard to create was not a victory. It was a vacancy, a gap in a cosmic defense system he never knew existed, and that vacancy demanded to be filled. The message was not from a person. It was from a system, an automated protocol triggered by the death of its sibling. Aris' legacy was not a single burden to bear. It was a chain, and the next link had just been forged, its weight settling onto his shoulders with an audible click. The work did not just continue, it was expanding, and he was now an integral, living component in a machine he could not see. The star chart was not an invitation to explore. It was a vector for a purpose, drawing a line from the ashes of one grave directly to the doorstep of the next. What do you do when the call is not a cry for help, but a command from a ghost? The star chart bloomed across the main viewer like a spider's web spun from starlight and shadow, its terminus a single, blinking coordinate in a sea of absolute black. Kael's hands, still trembling slightly from adrenaline and exhaustion, settled onto the worn leather of the pilot's controls. The familiar grooves under his fingers felt different now, no longer the tools of a scavenger but the instruments of a sentinel. His voice was low, stripped of all doubt. Plot the course, Bex. It seems we are in the warning business now. The ship's artificial intelligence responded without a trace of her earlier caution. Acknowledged, course laid in for the Orion Spur. Transition to faster-than-light travel in 3 minutes. The rust bucket's engines began their deep, rising hum, a sound that usually promised the open road of the cosmos but now felt like the drawing of a sword. He was not chasing a mystery anymore. He was answering a draft notice from a dead man, reporting for a duty he never enlisted for. Echo Station 14 awaited, a silent sibling to the tomb he had just destroyed. What new horror, what fresh permutation of the scattered would he find there? The first station had been a prison. The next could be anything, an observatory, a laboratory, or perhaps a weapon aimed at a target he could not yet see. The work was not a burden he carried alone. He was now a single thread being woven back into a tapestry of defense that stretched across the galaxy, a pattern designed by a ghost to hold back the endless, hungry dark. The rust bucket's warp drive engaged with a low thrum that resonated deep in the ship's bones, a final, purposeful note in the symphony of chaos left behind. In an instant, the starfield outside the viewport stretched into brilliant, impossible lines, and the fading cloud of what was once Echo Station 13 vanished, replaced by the hypnotic, blue-shifted tunnel of faster-than-light travel. The silence that settled inside the cockpit was different this time. It was not the empty quiet of a derelict or the tense hush before a storm. It was the focused stillness of a new purpose, a burden willingly, if grimly, accepted. Kael was no longer just a man who had answered a call. He was the call now, a living signal moving through the void, carrying the ghost of Dr. Aris and the memory of a station's sacrifice within the very framework of his ship. He had left a grave behind, but he was not fleeing. He was advancing, heading directly toward the next link in a chain of silent guardians. What other echoes were waiting out there in the dark, and what would they demand of him when he finally arrived?